White woman calls the cops on black teen. But she's left speechless. When his dad, the Navy SEAL chief, shows up, it was a typical afternoon when a white woman, visibly upset, called the police on a young black teen standing outside her property. The teen, who was simply waiting for a friend, had done nothing wrong, but the woman, fueled by assumptions and bias, felt threatened by his presence. Within moments, the tense situation escalated as officers arrived, questioning the teenager, who was trying to stay calm despite the growing anxiety. However, the story took a shocking turn when the boy's father, the Navy SEAL chief, arrived on the scene. Known for his discipline, leadership, and no-nonsense approach, he walked up with a calm but commanding presence. The woman, who had been so sure of her actions, was stunned into silence when she realized the young man she had wrongfully accused was the son of someone far more powerful than she could have imagined. The moment was a reminder that assumptions can lead to dangerous consequences, and that sometimes it takes someone with extraordinary strength to show us the truth. If you enjoyed Extra Story Life and want to see more real-life moments of strength, courage, and empowerment, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who need a little motivation, and subscribe to Extra Story Life for more incredible stories that make a difference. Your support means the world to us. The sun hung high in the sky, casting its warm, golden light over the park. Families and children ran around, enjoying the carefree beauty of the day. There was laughter in the air, the sound of birds chirping, and the gentle hum of the world turning. The park was a sanctuary for many, a place where people could unwind, escape from the stress of their daily lives, and simply enjoy the peaceful rhythm of nature. Amidst the bustle of picnics, games, and chatter, 16-year-old Malik sat quietly on a bench, his eyes focused on the pages of a book. He had recently moved to the neighborhood with his single mother, and though he was still finding his place in this new environment, the park had become a solace for him. It was his way of connecting with the world around him while also maintaining a sense of calm amidst the uncertainty of his new life. Malik had always been a quiet, introspective teen. He had big dreams, ones he kept mostly to himself, unsure of how to voice them in a world that often didn't seem to understand him. His mother, a strong, hard-working woman, had sacrificed everything to give him the chance to attend a better school, to live in a safer neighborhood, and to experience a better life. Malik knew he owed it to her to make the most of it, but at times, adjusting to a new school, new classmates, and a new community was overwhelming. He had always been a bit of an outsider, and though he had friends, they were few and far between. Malik wasn't the type to make friends easily. He wasn't loud, and he wasn't the first to jump into conversations. But he had a kind heart, and he knew how to listen, a quality that most people seem to appreciate. His deep thinking and sense of empathy made him an excellent listener, and he often found himself listening to the stories of others rather than sharing his own. This particular day was no different. Malik had come to the park to escape the noise and pressure of his life at school. He wasn't interested in sports or playing games with other kids. Instead, he relished the time to himself, the time to read, think, and observe. He would sit on the bench, watching people pass by, taking in the sights of the park, the small children playing tag, the old man feeding pigeons, the couples strolling hand in hand. To him, it was all part of the rhythm of life. His thoughts often wandered, and as he sat there reading, he let his mind drift between the pages of his book and the world around him. Everything was peaceful until a woman, walking her dog, passed by him. She was in her late 40s, with blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail and dressed in casual workout clothes. Her dog, a large golden retriever, tugged at the leash as it excitedly sniffed the grass. The woman seemed in a hurry, walking briskly, but when she caught sight of Malik sitting alone on the bench, something in her demeanor shifted. Her stride slowed, and she glanced at him with a look of suspicion. Malik, unaware of her gaze, continued reading, his head slightly tilted down, focused on the words in front of him. For a moment, the woman hesitated. She had walked past many people in the park that day, but something about Malik, sitting by himself, caught her attention. It wasn't that he was doing anything wrong, far from it. He was simply a teenager sitting quietly, minding his own business. But as she looked at him, she felt an unease settle in her stomach. Maybe it was the way he was dressed, his hoodie pulled up over his head, or perhaps the fact that he was sitting alone in a park with no one else around him. It was hard to put into words, but something about his presence felt out of place to her. In her mind, she associated the park with families, children, and people enjoying the day. The idea of a lone teenager sitting quietly, especially one who didn't fit the mold of the typical park-goer, made her uneasy, without giving it a second thought. The woman slowed down even more, now walking parallel to Malik on the path. She noticed that he didn't acknowledge her or anyone around him. His head remained down, eyes focused on his book. The woman continued to observe him, her discomfort growing. She glanced around the park, looking at the families and children, enjoying themselves, and then, in a split second, her thoughts turned darker. What is he doing here? Why is he alone? She thought to herself. The thoughts were irrational, driven by a deep-seated suspicion that she didn't fully understand, but couldn't ignore. Her suspicion quickly morphed into an impulse. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling slightly, and dialed the police. "Hello, yes," she said in a tone that was firm but shaky. "There's a young black boy sitting alone in the park. He looks suspicious, and I don't feel safe. I think you should send someone to check on him." Her voice was filled with a quiet urgency, but it was clear that she was projecting her own unease onto Malik without any reason or justification. She had made an assumption about him, and without a second thought, she acted on it. Malik had no idea that the woman had called the police. He was still lost in his book, unaware of the growing tension surrounding him. It wasn't until he saw the police car pull up to the park that he felt a sudden jolt of fear. The officers got out, their eyes scanning the area, and when they saw him sitting alone, their gaze fixed on him. Malik's heart skipped a beat. He had done nothing wrong. He was just sitting on a bench, reading. But suddenly he felt like a target. He tried to stay calm, but a lump formed in his throat as one of the officers approached him. "Hey, son," the officer said, his voice calm but commanding. "Is everything okay here?" Malik nodded quickly, still unsure why the officer was talking to him. "Yes, I'm just reading." But the officer wasn't convinced. The officer's questions became more direct, more probing, and Malik could see that they were assuming something was wrong. The woman who had called the police watched from a distance, still gripping the leash of her dog, her eyes locked on Malik. He could feel her gaze burning into him, a judgment that he couldn't escape. Malik wanted to speak up, to explain, but his throat felt tight, his words stuck. The situation had spiraled out of control so quickly that he didn't know how to stop it. Just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, another figure appeared in the distance, walking briskly toward them. It was his father, David Harris, a man whose presence commanded attention wherever he went. David, a Navy SEAL chief, had been on a mission for weeks, and today he had come to surprise his son. As soon as he saw the officers surrounding Malik, he knew something was wrong. David strode toward the scene with purpose, his military training allowing him to remain calm and measured. His commanding presence immediately shifted the energy in the air. As he approached, the officers stood a little straighter, sensing the authority in his every step. The woman, now realizing who David was, stood frozen in place, her face draining of color as the realization hit her. This wasn't just any boy. This was the son of a Navy SEAL chief, a powerful man with a reputation of service and strength. The officers, who had initially approached Malik with suspicion, now found themselves standing in the shadow of David's quiet power. David turned to the officers, his voice calm but firm. "What's going on here?" he asked, His eyes locked. On the woman. The officers, visibly flustered, explained the situation, but David wasn't interested in their excuses. His focus was on the woman who had made the call. "You don't judge people based on how they look," he said quietly, but with enough force to make her take a step back. "You don't make assumptions about someone just because they're sitting quietly in a park. This ends now." The woman stammered out an apology, but it was too late. She had already made her judgment, and the consequences of her actions were clear. As David turned to his son, his protective hand on Malik's shoulder, the officers stepped back, realizing that they had been part of something unjust. The scene, once filled with tension, now slowly diffused, and the community learned a valuable lesson. Assumptions, especially those based on race, can lead to devastating consequences. For Malik, it was a moment of realization that no matter where he went or what he did, his father would always be there to stand up for him. The story spread throughout the community, and Malik's experience became a rallying point. It was a reminder of how one act of kindness and protection could change everything. The story didn't just end with Malik. It had ripple effects, changing the way the community thought about race, bias, and assumptions, and ultimately, it reinforced the importance of standing up for what's right. The woman, whose name was Karen, paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of Malik sitting on the park bench, engrossed in his book. The air around them seemed to shift, and for a brief moment, time stood still. Malik, unaware of her watchful gaze, continued flipping through the pages of his book, lost in the story. His mind was far away, escaping into the words, the rhythm of the text, giving him the peace he needed to drown out the worries of everyday life. It was one of those rare moments when he could simply exist, letting the world around him fade into the background. The park was his sanctuary, and for a few hours, it was a place where he could relax and reflect without fear or concern. However, Karen's pause was not one of contemplation, but suspicion. She watched him for a moment longer, her eyes scanning his every move, and it wasn't long before her expression shifted from casual curiosity to something darker. She took a step closer, her steps deliberate and cautious. The tension between them grew with every second, as if the very air around them had thickened, laden with unspoken judgments. Malik, still unaware, felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He shifted slightly and, sensing someone's presence, looked up, meeting her gaze. His smile was polite, the kind of smile that he always gave to strangers, an effort to seem approachable. He offered a simple greeting. "Hey there." But instead of responding kindly, Karen's eyes narrowed even further, her expression hardening into something far from welcoming. Malik, puzzled by her sudden shift in demeanor, felt the air grow colder. The grip on her dog's leash tightened, her knuckles turning white. Karen muttered something under her breath, too quiet for Malik to hear, but he could feel the judgment in her every movement. It wasn't until she pulled out her phone that the unease in the air became undeniable. Malik's stomach dropped as she dialed a number, her face fixed in a look of determination, though he had no idea what she was about to do. He stood up, slowly trying to gauge what was going on, but before he could say anything, Karen spoke, her voice sharp and clear. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious black teen loitering in the park. He's acting strangely and I don't feel safe." The E. Words hit Malik like a slap to the face. Suspicious? Strangely? He was simply sitting there, reading, minding his own business, doing nothing that could warrant such a response. He hadn't interacted with anyone, hadn't made any noise or caused any disruption, but Karen had already made up her mind about him. The very moment her eyes locked onto him, he had become something he wasn't, something he didn't deserve to be, a stranger, a threat, someone who didn't belong. Her assumptions, born from nothing more than the color of his skin, had already dictated the course of her actions. Malik's heart began to race, confusion and alarm settling into his chest. What was happening? Why was this happening to him? I'm not doing anything wrong, Malik tried to explain, his voice shaking slightly, though he tried to remain calm. His words were a plea for reason, for the chance to explain himself. But Karen wasn't listening. She was too consumed by the narrative she had already created in her mind. Her eyes never left him, her gaze sharp and filled with disdain. Her tone was laced with judgment, her words dripping with the assumptions she'd made about him. "You don't belong here," she seemed to say with every glance, every movement. "You're a threat even if I don't know exactly why." The conversation with the dispatcher continued, and Malik could hear the woman's voice rise, her words becoming more urgent, more convincing, as she painted a picture of a dangerous, suspicious black teenager sitting alone in the park. Malik's confusion turned to fear. He could feel the weight of her accusation pressing down on him, making him feel small, unworthy, and invisible all at once. He was no longer just a teenager sitting quietly on a park bench. In Karen's eyes, he was a threat, a problem to be solved, and that problem in her mind had to be reported. The dispatcher on the other end of the line, probably hearing only the woman's side of the story, was already making arrangements to send officers to the scene. Malik felt a pang of panic rising in his chest. What was he supposed to do? Was there any way to change her mind? How could he prove he wasn't a threat when Karen had already decided he was? He tried to explain again, but the woman's voice overpowered him, her confidence now unwavering. The assumption had been made, and there was no room for discussion. As the police arrived, their footsteps echoing in the quiet of the park, Malik could feel his pulse quicken. The officers, too, now saw him with suspicion, just as Karen had. He hadn't even done anything to provoke this. But in their eyes, he was already guilty of something, even though he had no idea what that something was. They walked toward him, slowly, their faces unreadable, their presence intimidating. Malik felt like he was standing in front of a wall that he could never break through. The same people who should have protected him were now the ones who were contributing to his sense of isolation and fear. Karen, still clutching her phone, stood a few feet away, watching the scene unfold with a smug sense of satisfaction. She had done what she thought was necessary. She had done what she believed would make her feel safe. And in that moment, Malik realized that this wasn't just about a misunderstanding. This was about a bias that existed long before this incident, a prejudice that colored the way people saw him, and a system that would always place the blame on him, no matter how much he tried to prove otherwise. As the officers approached, his thoughts raced, and for a moment he thought about just walking away. But he knew that wouldn't be possible. Not today, not like this. Instead, he stood there, facing the growing anxiety, trying his best to hold his ground. What he didn't know was that this moment, this awful misjudgment, was only the beginning. It would take an unexpected arrival to change everything. But, for now, he was trapped in a situation where nothing made sense. As the call ended, Karen stepped closer to Malik, who was now standing up, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "What do you think you're doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. Malik, who had done nothing but sit quietly on the bench, was taken aback. He tried to explain himself again, telling her that he was just sitting there reading, waiting for his mom to pick him up. But Karen wasn't having it. She continued to challenge him, questioning his presence and making him feel like he was out of place. Just then, Malik heard the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance. The police were on their way. Malik's heart began to race. He couldn't understand why this was happening, why his simple afternoon had escalated to this. As the officers arrived, Malik knew there was little he could do. He tried to remain calm, but his hands began to shake. The officers approached, assessing the situation, and Malik's anxiety grew. The woman stood behind them, still clutching her phone, insisting that the officers needed to remove the suspicious person from the park. Malik was now caught in a situation where, no matter how innocent he tried to appear, the color of his skin seemed to be a target in itself. He had never imagined that a peaceful day at the park would lead to a confrontation with the police. Just as Malik was about to be questioned by the officers, another voice rang out. "What's going on here?" A deep, commanding voice came from behind the officers. Everyone turned around, and standing tall was Malik's father, Chief David Harris, a Navy SEAL with years of service to his country. His presence was enough to immediately command attention. Malik's father had been away on a mission for some time, but he had recently returned to spend time with his family. When he heard from Malik's mother that their son had gone to the park, he decided to surprise him. But when he arrived at the scene and saw his son surrounded by police, his blood began to boil. David strode forward with purpose, his uniform, still bearing the marks of his service, his demeanor a mixture of authority and protectiveness. The officers froze, unsure of how to handle the situation with a man of David's stature standing before them. Karen's face turned pale as she realized who had just arrived. She had no idea that this was Malik's father, and even less that he was the Navy SEAL chief. "Is there a problem here?" David asked, his voice low and steady, but with a commanding edge. He looked at the officers, then back at the woman, who now stood speechless, her initial bravado gone. She had called the cops on an innocent teen, and now she was facing the one person who could bring everything crashing down. The tension in the air was palpable, but David's calm presence diffused the situation instantly. The officers, realizing their mistake, immediately apologized to David and Malik, asking if they could do anything to rectify the situation. But David, with the wisdom and experience of someone who had spent years dealing with tough situations, simply shook his head. "There's nothing to fix," he said, his voice firm. "What's done is done. But remember this, assumptions like this can have lasting consequences." He turned to Karen, who now seemed small and vulnerable in front of him. "You don't get to treat people this way," he said calmly but with authority. "It's time to rethink how you see the world." Karen, now realizing the gravity of her actions, stammered out an apology, but David wasn't interested in it. He had made his point. With his son by his side, he walked away, leaving Karen and the officers to reflect on the situation. Word of the incident spread quickly throughout the community, and what had started as a potentially dangerous and unfair encounter became a powerful lesson about the dangers of bias, assumptions, and racial prejudice. Malik, thanks to his father's unwavering support and calm leadership, knew that no matter what others might assume about him, he had a strong foundation of respect, love, and guidance to stand on. For everyone watching, Malik's story became a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for what is right, knowing that even when the odds are stacked against you, the truth and integrity will always prevail.